by education, by commitment, as Chesky said, and Chabad is undoubtedly the best example of all of that. So, Susie, good joke. But it enables us to look beyond that, and maybe Susie had something else in mind. Maybe she observed that things at the moment seem to be not travelling well, and they're not, even here in Australia. So maybe we need to have a look, and maybe the question should say, do Jews have a future in Australia, in South America, and so on? I meet people from all over the world, Jewish people from all over the world, and you get different feedback about what's going on. For example, going back, and I've got my neighbour from down the road, Michael, here, in an earlier time in the FSU, in the former Soviet Union, you could query whether Jews had a future. There was every attempt to extinguish the Pintel Yid, any Jewish connection whatsoever. Somehow, remarkably, it flourished, and with the campaign to let our people go, v'ya'avduni, so they should serve me, the rest of the sentence, and the release of Jewry from the Soviet world, who came and buttressed Israel in a most remarkable way at a time when people were concerned about demography. Today, there is a serious question about freedom and protection of Jewish rights in the Soviet Union, while at the same time there's a flourishing at the same time, a lot to do with Chabad, of course, and other movements. The Mizrahi movement is also involved there. If we look at other places in the world, and I'll just give you a few examples, and then we'll focus perhaps more on Israel and Australia. France, terrible. But there are always people who delude themselves and think things are okay. So I'll give you two different opinions. Okay, so one of the pieces of paper that I brought here is a reference to a French leader called Pierre. Dad, your French is better than mine. Besnanou, who is a recently elected president of the European Jewish Congress, a leader of French Jewry, who was in the news recently after protesting against too much intervention on the part of American Jewish organisations in the affairs of European Jewry. And he and others believed that European Jewry there'll be a resurgence because of the establishment of the European Union. And they just had a conference called the Organisation for Security and Cooperation in Europe, which was on the International Conference on Anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, Racism and Xenophobia, where they hoped that there would be strong statements referring to anti-Semitism and vilification. And it ended up with expressions of lack of tolerance against Muslims and other minorities, in an attempt to diminish the presentation of anti-Semitism as a unique phenomenon. So they went there believing that the result would be a strengthening of the Jewish position. It came out weaker, a little bit like the infamous conference in Durban. And reports presented to it demonstrated the danger of burgeoning anti-Semitism in Russia and other parts of Eastern Europe, and stressed that in most countries there are significant shortcomings in law enforcement, prevention and follow-up. This article is written by Avi Becker and it appeared in Haaretz. And in talking about the Muslims, people often refer to Kufat HaZahav, the golden age, the period of time in Spain when Jews were apparently able to flourish in other Muslim lands. Modern historical research tends to be more cautious and critical, and to have reservations about the euphoric approach that characterised the descriptions of the golden age of Jews in Spain. Current experts on Islam describe the area, say that the description of that era in idyllic terms stems from the imagination of Jewish historians in Central Europe, particularly 19th century Germany, who were disappointed with the wave of anti-Semitism that threatened all the achievements of anticipation. Those historians wanted to prove to the democratic liberal Europe of that period how tolerant the Muslim regime had been to its Jews in the Middle Ages. Now, in Cordoba, where this conference took place, the illusions about the golden age of the European Union have dissipated, and what remains are only the doubts concerning the future of Europe and its Jews. And the feedback is that, you know, it's not so comfortable in Europe today. Somebody just was visiting here who spends most of his working time in Munich during the week, lives in London on the weekends, and he says that he feels very comfortable in Munich. There's a very interesting piece here which talks about, from a Muslim source, who talks about the origins of current Islamic anti-Semitism that have taken place through most of the second half of the last century as having its sources in Nazi training. Al-Husseini, who was the Mufti of Jerusalem, who fled in 1942 and went to Deutschland, went there to receive training, first of all to encourage them to support the activities of anti-Semitism in Israel or Palestine at the time, and to get training and to establish. And the first place where the establishment of these Nazi-inspired Islamic anti-Semitic groups was in Munich. So one young man tells me he's in Munich, he doesn't see anything, and the origin of a lot of the anti-Semitism that's emanating in Europe is coming actually from Munich. It's at the same time. Now, I've got a colleague in Mizrahi called Binyamin Sayada, who I just met in Israel 2 weeks ago at the Zionist General Council, who tells me conditions and he's an older man, but a confident man. He's got Sephardi background, he's Harif, he gets excited very quickly, he's not intimidated, and he says, life is very bad. It's very serious in Paris. Now, if you travel and you walk around and you wear a hat and not a kippah, and if you wear a coat, and you don't identify yourself, you know, bon et Paris, it's beautiful, you know. But there's a lot of trouble there, and of course we understand why that is the case. I was reported in the paper with personal comments, and I'm here, and I'm mindful of the fact that I'm invited as the President of the State Zionist Council. So my comments have already been reported. But last night there was a function last night, and I'll come back to it in a moment, that was conducted by groups of people who are opposed to the disengagement. And I think it's very important that we should not fall into the trap of telling people what they can say and what they can do and what they can't do. There isn't a place for repression. That repression takes place in other parts of the world. It shouldn't take place here. But the reason I mentioned last night is because last night there was a function hosted by the State Zionist Council that took place at the Windsor Hotel. It's an annual function celebrating Yom Ha'atzmaut. Now you might ask, how come we celebrate Yom Ha'atzmaut, which is Hey Iyar, now in the middle of Tammuz, almost the middle of Tammuz? The answer is because the celebration of that event is to encourage the participation of the parliamentarians of the Legislative Assembly and the Legislative Council, the state parliamentarians and federal ones who happened to be in town at the time, bank leaders, officers of the government in the bureaucracy, business leaders and so on, to promote Israel. And at the particular time when we wanted to do it, which was closer to Yom Ha'atzmaut, the Premier was away. And so it was postponed. We had a celebration for Israel, and the fact that it was delayed, you know, sometimes a late birthday party is better than no birthday party at all. And there were some 300 people who attended. The vast majority were people from the non-Jewish world who come to associate and commit their support, their commitment, and their interest in the State of Israel. And in doing so, give us significant encouragement. We live in a privileged society, there's no question about it. We live in a beautiful country, and a country where governments all around, both state and federal, are totally in support of Israel. So we see things perhaps in a different way, and we have